Hello, and welcome to the Angus and Pete Show. Views and opinions are strictly those of the presenters and their guests and should not be taken as advice. Goodness knows, we're not qualified to advise you about anything. Side effects may include mild amusement and occasional enlightenment with feelings of embarrassment, apathy, disappointment, and pity.
Welcome to episode 21. I'm Angus Pacey.
And I'm Pete Brown, and we are the Angus and Pete Show.
The place where you could listen to two guys chatting about the riveting world of customer engagement.
Otherwise known as call centre, contact centre, customer service, customer experience, CX, or whatever else you're calling it this week.
If you want to find out more about us, then check us out on LinkedIn.
So Angus, what's in the postbag this week?
I think we got two really interesting comments. The first one was Andy from Newbury. And he started out with a very interesting point. He said, I've not listened to many episodes because I know it all. Okay. But the one thing I'm interested in is how do I get my sales teams to qualify opportunities?
He obviously doesn't know it all then, does he?
No, not quite.
Okay. Well, Andy from Newbury, I think you might want to invest some time listening to the Angus and Pete Show because there genuinely are some useful bits and pieces there. I suggest, for example, you listen to episodes 5, 6 and 7, which was the RFP series, which are laced with tips and tricks on qualification of opportunities, as is episode 13, Pitch Perfect, episode 16, Business Case or Basket Case, and finally, the most recent episode before this one, episode 20, The Devil is in the Discovery. And if that doesn't fill you up with the knowledge that you are so obviously lacking, ping us a message and we'll see what we can do to help.
We are always helpful. All you have to do is ask.
Exactly. All you have to do is ask. You said there were two. There was something else?
Yeah, the other one was Luke from London. He liked the last episode. And he sort of adds some clarification as well, which I thought was interesting. He says, many deals that are unqualified or lost or end in no decision are a result of poor discovery of business problems. They're not always technical or pricing issues.
Right. Yeah, because actually discovery, qualification, discovery, they're similar but they're not the same, aren't they? They're things that really are going on all the time.
But if you're doing no discovery and you're not engaging with your customer, your qualification becomes infinitely more difficult.
Absolutely. So on that note, let's get on with the show. And it's exciting, isn't it? Because we've got another CX Insider with us today, our third.
Yeah. And just for first-time listeners, we handpick our guests because they are experts in their field and have deep knowledge and experience in our CX and contact center industry that I'm sure all listeners will want to hear.
Yeah, and they join us on the show in their own right. Their views are their own. They don't represent any organisations or third parties. We don't pay them. They don't pay us. No money changes hands.
So our CX Insider in this episode is Terry. He's a very seasoned and experienced contact center and CX seller. He's worked for some of the leading industry big tech vendors in the reseller base and also in smaller and medium-sized vendors as well.
Yeah, he spends a lot of his time handling, managing, controlling formal procurement processes, particularly in the public sector. So RFPs, RFIs, ITTs, those three-letter acronyms that, Andy, if you'd listened to all the other episodes, you'd know exactly what they mean. They're all out there. And he was very interested after listening to our RFP series to come on and give us his opinion.
So we sat down with Terry earlier to listen to his experiences and sort of get some insights of the RFP game. And we both knowing, we were hoping for some real challenging thoughts and if we were lucky, controversial opinions. And he did not disappoint.
No, he didn't. So let's go and have a listen to what he had to say for himself.
CX Insider, your inside track.
So Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been in this world of contact centres, customer experience, the things that we're calling it this week, since 1993.
Goodness.
I was an agent at BT in operator services. And I remember when I went through my entrance test at BT, you had the operating manual, you had to learn it word for word. Every conversation was completely scripted. And we had this thing called the urgent hook. And when I tell people about the urgent hook, they never believe me about it, but it's true, it was a thing. So the idea is that you have a fully structured day. You plug your headset in and off you go. You've got 42 seconds handling time. You will handle 65 calls an hour. This stuff is ingrained. And you knew what was coming to an extent, and you knew how to deal with it. I loved this world. It was so structured, but every minute was different. So you'd get your shift, and you'd get your breaks. You knew exactly when you were going for a break. But then there would be a call of nature. And it was outside of the break. So you had the hook, the urgent hook. It was one of those little self-adhesive plastic hooks when it was just stuck on a wall. You would unplug your headset and you would hang your headset on the urgent hook, go and use the facilities, come back, plug in, and off you go. There's 100 people in that switch room. Of all the things that I experienced in that time, I remember that joy when you would see the people that needed the hook. And there's one hook, and there's 100 people. It was like, and I'm going to show my age with this reference, it was like It's a Knockout. It was trying to get to the hook. So things moved on. I was an operator, and then I was an emergency operator dealing with 9s calls, an international operator. And then BT announced that they would close the centre. So you got various options about what you wanted to do, and I went into BT business sales. And up to that point, I didn't like salespeople at all, right? Because I just didn't understand the nature of this thing that we are in. Because regardless of what your job is, and my job at the moment has a grand title of Director of Public Sector, we still perform a function of sales. We are still selling ideas to people. We are all contributors to this community that we create of buyers and sellers. Strangely, over the years, whereas I hear a lot of sellers talk about public sector is hard, and they don't want to do that because it's just too hard, it's too structured, I actually like that. I don't know if it's a masochistic thing. I just gravitate towards that. I want to get better at understanding it and having this illusion of controlling it. I've been selling into public sector for at least 20 years now. And I've worked with some great managers along the way, some great teams, won some really good deals that I'm very proud of. And you feel like you're making a difference. So now my day-to-day job is working with a dedicated bid team, working with sellers. So we're one of the largest suppliers to the UK public sector. And every day is about the next opportunity, the next bid, the next tender, and how are we going to adapt what it is that we've got to the requirements within the tender. So that's me.
Have you been a seller in the private sector? And what's the difference between public sector and private sector in a sentence?
In enterprise, you get to sell on value. In public sector, you don't. Because of something that I call the cost gate. So if you take the top 10 vendors of this contact center as a service technology, right? They all do 80% of the same stuff. They talk about it in different ways. And we know that particularly in the public sector, that people are generally only going to actually adopt 80% of the stuff that they ask for. We can build a really compelling story. We can build these propositions. We can match them to the customer's objectives. But then you have the cost gate. And the cost gate is this formula that's used to say, look, you are X amount more than the cheapest bidder. Therefore, you're going to carry that penalty into the quality score.
Right.
So often we will respond to bids and we will win on quality by a substantial amount, but we will lose based on price. When the tender comes out, we are told that price is only 30% of the consideration. 70% is on quality, or more likely these days it's 60%, and 10% on social value, which we'll come back to. But in reality, it isn't. Price is everything. If there's too much of a gap in price, you can't make that up in quality.
So you've effectively given a really good segue into RFPs, which I guess is the lifeblood of public sector and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. RFP, Angus, do you mean requests for proposal?
Yeah, I was going to use the title of our podcast episode, and I decided not to. But let's just step back a bit and look at RFPs in that process. What are they trying to achieve?
It's a really good question. Okay, and just for the benefit of the listener, when we use the phrase RFP, essentially it is a formalized procurement process for them to engage with us. So what are they trying to achieve? You could be idealistic about this and say, well, they are trying to achieve the best outcome that meets their business objectives. Okay, they're trying to formalize the process of engaging with suppliers so that they can reach a level playing field for them to do their scoring on. Okay, so I'm going to try and normalize what everybody says to me and then score it and then work out who's the winner. In reality, an RFP can cause a problem. Engagement outside of an RFP process, I would use questioning, conversations, trying to work out whether they really understand what their requirements are. And that helps us to put together a proposition, right? The RFP takes that away. It says, you will answer these questions in the way that I dictate, you will price it in the way that I dictate, and then I will try and somehow come up with a score to, marry one against the other and work out which is the best one for us.
Okay. So I've heard people talk about 3-to-1 ratios and that sort of stuff. This 3-to-1 ratio. What is it?
So there's two really important numbers when you're dealing with public sector. Even if we put aside the 15-month sales cycle, which is the average for public sector from the point at which someone decides they want something to the point of actually ordering it, you're looking at 15 months. The 3-to-1 ratio is that we will win 1 of every 3 bids that we do. It's the only way this works, because the first question that you ask is not, can we bid it? It's should we bid it? This has to make economic sense, okay? Nobody can afford to bid everything. The other number is £30,000. I can average it out and I know that a bid is going to cost me £30,000 to respond to. So how many of these opportunities that come to us am I ever going to see that £30,000 in again?
So what do you say to those MDs and FDs who say, RFPs, we bid them all. It's just a numbers game. They're obviously looking at the wrong numbers, right? They're looking at the 3-to-1. They're not looking at the 30K.
Do you know what the success rate is on a cold tender generally in the industry?
Tell me.
Single figures, somewhere between 7 and 8%.
Yeah.
And that's if you've got a really good platform and a really good proposition and you're prepared to go in at the very bottom of the pricing.
Makes you wonder why anybody bothers, doesn't it?
There's an art to this. And it is a constant discussion. If we bid more, we win more. No, if you bid more, you put more pressure on your bid team and your quality of bid response suffers.
Right.
So it's about making a decision based on, is this getting us closer to 1 in 3? And are we ever going to see that £30,000 again?
So that ratio isn't a ratio of all the RFPs that you could bid. It's actually the ratio based on RFPs that you choose to respond to. And I'm interested to know, how do you get some structure around identifying the type of RFP or bid scenario that you're into? Yeah,
okay. So we're going to lift the lid on something here, which is some of this is going to be slightly contentious.
Okay. Oh, come on, Terry. We don't like that. We can't have contentious on the Angus and Pete show.
You never do contentious and we never do contentious. Come on, Terry.
I've thought about this and I've got 4 buckets. We will call the first bucket the full and fair tender. I review with the bid team the documentation and we believe that the customer has a really good grasp of what they need. They understand the commercial landscape. They are in a position where they actually do want to buy something. And it's not a foregone conclusion. That last one is the killer. That is what separates buckets 1 and 2. Do we believe that this is a foregone conclusion? And there's lots of ways that I have to determine that. But let's start on the positives. I just want to name check someone here because there is a tender I saw a couple of years ago and it's public record. Anybody can go and look at this tender. And it was for Telford and Wrekin Council. And it was brilliant. What they did was put something like 40 questions and it said, here's my business challenge. How would you solve it? It was that simple. This thing was just elegant. Don't tell me a product. Use your experience in your lives to give me an answer to this question. So it was telling you everything that you needed to know. But it wasn't about, I'm going to sell you this product and this module. It was, what's it going to do?
So what they were giving you was a really good context that they were operating within so that you had a good set of information to work from.
Yeah, and it wasn't about, you can only answer this question in a certain way. It was, how would you do it? They used that to drive all of the conversations and then ask for pricing and then award it. It was a properly inclusive process. They talked to everybody and they kept the conversations really open. And so, I mean, I would do them every day of the week.
You've got to be dealing with credible people, and you've got to be dealing with people that look like they understand their problems.
It was a fantastic tender to work on. And that's what you're looking for. Does somebody understand the challenges? Can they articulate? And is there a real appetite for change? Because change comes at a cost, which leads me to the second bucket, not so open. So this is a tender that will come out into the wild and you read it and you go, something smells here. Now you've got to try and put your finger on what smells. Now, some tenders, as we know, will come out and they're purely an exercise in beating up the incumbent on a renewal cost. If somebody spent a significant amount of money in recent history, the cost of change is going to be so much. Why on earth are they doing this? It might be history. It might be the way that they've conducted tenders before. It might even be the documents. One of my favourite tricks is to look at the history of the documents that are provided. Who wrote them? I have previously had calls to pick up the phone to a procurement team and say, you may want to revisit this tender because you've left the name of the account director on a particular supplier on your document.
Schoolboy error.
It hasn't been rigged at all at that point.
No, they need 3 quotes, right? That's the trick, is to spot if you're just in there for 3 quotes. So I would rather someone else did that because that's time and money that I could be better spending elsewhere. The other one in here is consultants. Is a consultant involved in the process, and does that consultant have a history of awarding to a particular solution?
Terry,
yes.
What are you suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is that it's a great indicator. It's not the only thing that I would base it on, but it would raise a significant question. We understand this consultant is involved in this process. Are they involved in the decision-making criteria? Yeah. And if they respond, yeah, then I'll make a decision at that point. But I will communicate back to them what that decision is and why. It's up to them what they do with that information.
What's the typical response you get from the buyer?
They're left to make their own decision, but the response to that is generally stony silence.
Right.
There's got to be 40 points of data here. Do we understand the customer? Have we had previous engagement? What's their spend profile like? There's about 40 different things that we look at. That's just one of them. And you can't have any one thing in the process that skews everything to that extent. It's a feel. There's an art to this, and no one ever gets it completely right, but it's all about the 1 in 3. Had we pursued that tender, I would have had no confidence that it would have helped me with the 1 in 3.
So you've got the fair process, you've got the unfair process.
Yeah.
I know there are 2 other categories that we're going to come on to, but generally, what percentage of RFP invitations to tender that you see are unfair, are loaded in some way, in your opinion?
It's nowhere near as high as you might think.
Right, okay.
Most tenders and most purchasing departments are trying to do the right thing. It's a difficult thing for them as well, right? You've got to bear in mind that these people might buy a contact center as a service platform every 5 years, but we tell them every day.
Yeah.
So our job is to try and help them to know how to buy this, right? And for all of these different buying methodologies, they all have a place, but it doesn't change the basic questioning. Do we understand what they want? Do we have a proposition that can win this? Can we do it commercially sensibly? All of these key things that we need to do.
Yeah.
Now, you guys have talked quite a lot in recent episodes about AI. How many tenders do I see? Every tender now says AI, but nobody really knows what they want to do with it. Which leads us on to the third bucket. The fantasy shopper. The fantasy shopper. Now, this is generally smaller organisations that do this. So they will send out a tender, lengthy. It's just got every technology you've ever heard of. And it's all a mandatory requirement. And they have 30 agents. And they want workforce management, workforce optimization, sentiment analysis. And I'm looking at it and thinking, you can't use WFM on 30 agents. It doesn't work. I know that. They've seen it demoed by someone, think it would be a great thing. But the tender itself doesn't provide a mechanism for me to tell them that. So then we're into the art of the clarification question. So these fantasy shopper tenders are generally won and lost in the clarification questions. can we ask questions that really get to the heart and help us to understand that they actually know what it is they want? Because it's easy to think, actually, look, this is a fantasy shopper tender. But it might be that they actually have a requirement for this. They just haven't explained it very well.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't just discount it. And if it's a mandatory requirement, I've got to put it in the price as well. So it hurts on the cost game.
So I've got a question on this one. If you look at the fantasy shopper, they're asking for utopia.
Yeah.
They've probably got a budget that can get them minimum viable product.
Yeah.
At what point and how do you decide even to start bidding or pursuing that and engaging? Because you can blow your $30,000 pounds investment in this real quick in a fantasy shopper case.
You can, very quickly. So first of all, in order to ask really good clarification questions, you've got to read the tender. And you've got to understand it. You've got to go and look at their published strategy and try and tie it together and work out what it is they're actually asking for and why are they asking for it. Well, this is all time and people that are involved in this. I'm already spending money in this thing. One of the things that's quite obvious is you look at the value of the tender. How much is actually the contract value of this thing? Am I ever going to see this money again? But the thing I'm really looking for is, you've asked me a question. How open are you to me challenging that question? And I'll get that from the clarification responses.
Yeah.
Time's also one of those indicators. If you send this out on Good Friday and say you want it back just after Easter, I'm going to assume that you already know who's going to win this. And that's why you did it.
So is the fantasy shopper scenario an indication that the buyer is inexperienced, doesn't really know how to get the best out of this process? Or is there something more to it?
I think there is space for buyer education, but I wouldn't call anybody inexperienced. I think this industry is not doing itself any favours. I've heard you guys talk about it. Everyone's saying the same thing. They're saying it in pretty much the same way, and the buyers are expected to make some sense out of this. It's a thankless task being a buyer.
It raises a question, actually, and this is going off piste a little bit, but all the marketing, all the effort that goes into these things, are they actually providing clarity, or are they just confusing the shit out of everybody?
No, that's a good point. We talk about marketing a lot. We talk about messaging a lot. How do you condense that down? How do you get it across to the customer in a way that makes sense to them?
Yeah. So if you look at that level of complexity, how do you differentiate from somebody who's a fantasy shopper and somebody who is so clueless, all they want is information in the format that they can digest?
Well, that leads us nicely onto the fourth bucket. So the fourth bucket is the early stage process. This is perhaps unfair to call it this, but it's the free consultancy. Mm-hmm. We've got a thing that we know we're going to do in the future, and we want to talk to some people, right? Now, I love these RFIs, the request for information, early market engagement. I absolutely love them if they are respectful of everybody that's involved. So if the early stage engagement comes out and says, look, we want to spend an hour and a half talking to your team about some of the challenges and some ideas that you might have, and it's an open conversation. I would travel to the end of the country and do them every day of the week. Of course, I want to have those conversations, right? It's what we live for. If, on the other hand, you say to me, we want you to arrive at this place in person, talk to me on these three subjects, 10 minutes on each, and you will not deviate from this script. Yeah, no thanks. Because it's not respectful of the process itself. You're not looking for someone to share new information with you. You're looking to validate your own opinions.
Yeah. They're just asking questions. They're not really thinking about the problems that they're solving. So it's a lose-lose, right? They don't get what they want. And the vendors...
A person that's doing the day-to-day selling job now, in the old days, it would have been mass email campaigns or cold calling or doing all of that kind of jazz. What I would much rather they were spending their time doing is these early market engagements. Go and talk to potential customers, go and challenge their assertions and try and have some influence on this. And I'm not talking about influencing how they buy. That's their decision. Influence the way that they go to market and ask the questions. Ask real questions. As I was talking about earlier on, keep it tied down to outcomes. Because here's the question. Let's imagine you get a really prescriptive tender. that says, we've had one recently, that said, you will not deviate from this. From this thing I have just now chiseled into stone, you will not deviate from this. And it occurred to me when I read that, I thought, if the wheels come off this, if this doesn't go the way that you thought it was going to go, and it doesn't end up being a great thing for the business, whose fault is it?
Yep.
Because I never had a chance to influence anything.
So are you advocating for business development team that is really focused on influencing early on, dealing with these investigations, starting to shape people's thinking? Are you saying that would be a good thing to have in this era of complexity, because it's getting more complex?
Yes, is the short answer. Absolutely. I think that's an incredibly valuable use of time and resources. I think that's probably better than, spending hours going through LinkedIn or whatever it is that people do. We can all look at Tussle, and other platforms are available for market intelligence. But to be fair, even that's going to get easier under the new procurement rules, because now 18 months before someone goes out to procurement, they're going to send out a notice to tell everybody we're going to procurement in 18 months. So it's going to change the landscape of everything we do. So these early conversations are everything.
So we said right at the beginning, you had your decision-making criteria.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to decide early on whether they're going to do this or not.
Mm-hmm.
So you decide that you're going to proceed.
Yeah.
And then something that you thought was fair, you're starting to realise there are other things going on. How do you handle that? At what point do you cut your losses, or how assertive do you get to try and keep the thing on track for you?
Once I'm in it, and I'm going to go with it. It is incredibly rare to pull out of one once you've already done your submission.
Right, okay.
But one thing I'm so happy is happening is now we are getting much more detailed feedback and scoring once we've done a tender. So that's really helping us to evaluate what it is we're doing, but also what it is they're doing, which leads us on to the inevitable conclusion of some of these tenders, which is the appeal. Sometimes these things don't go our way. Sometimes it's our fault. Sometimes they're perfectly justified in the decisions they've made. Now, appeals are a funny thing, because I never appeal to change the outcome. I don't believe you can. I don't think anyone ever has. I appeal to protect the integrity of the process. So it's about saying, guys, you've scored us on this way, but I'm not sure I agree with that. Can you expand on that? Can you share with us why you're thinking that way for this thing? A great example. This was a significant tender. This one was huge. It was for a large public sector body, and this tender covered thousands of users. It was a big tender. And in the process, there was a clarification question that was really telling. And it said, do we need to quote for all of the existing licenses? Now, isn't that a funny question? And the organisation responded and said, yes, because we're using this as the metric by which we're going to score everybody. We want a level playing field on licenses. This is how we're going to work out the value. Right? Long story short, when the result was announced, it transpired that the people that won had bid less than half of the licenses. That's a nailed on stone cold appeal.
Yeah.
Because it's not about win, lose or draw. Nobody likes to lose, but it's about the process. Because how do I then justify to my team, look, our moral compass says we are going to bid this in a certain way. We're going to maintain our integrity. We're going to do this properly. Yeah, but they're doing half the stuff and they're still winning. So do we then compete with that behaviour, or do we maintain our own integrity and potentially suffer the loss? So it comes back to that first point about we're all involved in this, and the buyers shape the behaviour as much as we do.
So I've got an interesting one for you, because you're talking about the process, you're talking about the integrity and the criteria of that.
Yeah.
How do you deal in competitive situations where you know that your competition is going to be answering questions with capabilities, feature sets, roadmaps that you know do not exist today? What are you going to say where you know your competition is going to be bidding stuff and saying stuff that you know is patently false and misleading?
We have had one in the not too distant past where a competitor had used a reference site that doesn't use their platform at all. And I thought, honestly, I can't compete with that, because if we're just making stuff up now, we did highlight it to the buyer, who didn't actually comment. But look, it's just the nature of the game. Some people are going to do this stuff. Here's how I sleep at night. I think about this stuff in the fact that they will only sell it once. You know, if they win, well, this is going to come around again in 3 years, and they won't be at the table for that. And I think eventually there is public sector karma. So as long as we behave in the right way and act with integrity, eventually we'll win. I know that some of these will come around again before the end of the contract term, because they just can't do what they said they're going to do. But you've also got personalities, ego, and everything else. So if we go to the organisation and say, guys, we know that isn't true, but now they're emotionally invested in this decision, they don't want to say, oh, actually, yeah, we got this wrong. But like I said, I never appeal on the basis that I'm going to change the decision. It's about the process. And I like to think that if we do highlight some of this stuff and it comes to be true, that actually it increases our reputation within the industry. It says, yeah, these guys know what they're talking about. They told us what was going to happen. It happened, so let's go talk to them.
So with RFP karma still ringing in my ears,
yeah,
we have come to that point, Terry, where we give you the opportunity to drop 3 pearls of wisdom,
right,
for our listener. Those pearls of wisdom can be pretty much anything, but they need to be wise. That's
okay.
The clues in the name.
All right.
So what are your 3? What are they? What's number 1?
First one is honesty. And I've thought about this a lot, because everybody says they want honesty, but no one really does. Imagine a world in which they sent out a tender that said, look, we're sending this out. We are in contract with someone. We're just looking around. Don't sweat over it. Just send us some indicative pricing so we can beat up our current supplier, right? Because at least we all know where we stand and we can make decisions based on honesty. But honesty is a problem. I found this. I find myself as a relatively new parent, and honesty is not wanted by anyone. You know, when someone shows you a baby picture and you look at it and think, that baby looks the same as all the other babies that I've ever seen, right? No one wants to hear that. You know, when the kid brings back a picture they've drawn and coloured in at school, right? They don't want to hear it. They ain't going on the fridge. Look, you've gone over the lines. Don't do it again. So you have to be careful with honesty. But I do believe that it helps everybody if we can try to be just a bit more honest in this process. What our ambitions are, what we're trying to do, because then everybody knows what it is that we're trying to achieve, right?
Right. So honesty, that's a big one. That's number 1. What's the next one?
Next one, social value. You can't talk about public sector without social value.
So just before we go any further, you've mentioned social value a few times, and I've been itching to ask you, what is it? Give us a quick explanation, because I'm not sure everyone knows what social value is when it comes to...
Social value is an element of the tender process, an element of the procurement process, and government dictates that all public money that's spent needs to in some way benefit the community, benefit the people around it. So to me, social value is intrinsic in what we do. It should be around the environment. It should be around access to learning, things that are measurable, maybe donating devices. We do a lot of apprenticeships. We do apprenticeships in key areas for customers. So a customer can dictate that we want to take on so many apprentices within this postcode. So we do a lot of that stuff. What social value isn't is we want you to make a cash donation to us every year. What's worse,
seriously?
One recently, which is we want you to make a cash donation to this organisation that is organising our procurement every year.
You can't be serious that you actually got somebody saying...
They will have a procurement body and that's organising the tender, and you have to make a mandatory payment to that body. That is not social value. That has another name.
What is that name, Terry? Can you just clear it up for us?
Yeah.
I will not say the name, but it is an absolute turn-off. I will go to the ends of the earth to deliver proper social value. We have a scheme that we've invested in that plants trees all over the country and does green spacing and does all this sort of stuff. And, we donate technology. We do all this stuff because it's important. It's not an afterthought. I did hear a story recently of an organisation that won a tender, but they did it without actually submitting any social value at all, so they couldn't award it to them. So it's really important. Organisations have to accept that if you put in a really onerous level of social value, that what you're actually doing is increasing the cost of the solution because somebody's paying for this somewhere. But we're, you're a responsible supplier, a responsible organisation. We have a huge social value commitment, and I think it's so important that we need to protect it. So when I see the ones that are just a bit out there, pay us 2% every year of the value of the contract. No. Let us know how you get on with that.
Or you can buy your stuff via my credit card so that I can get all the Avios.
This is one of the things that people always say is, well, we want something that's measurable. Yeah, well, so do we. So I can measure this stuff. I can measure apprentices. I can measure all this great stuff that we do. We can show value on it. I don't know what you're going to do with that money.
So honesty, real social value.
Real social value.
Number 3?
Number 3, anybody that's ever been on a video call with me will know that I have a penchant for Star Wars. So I want May the 4th to be an official bank holiday.
May the 4th.
And for listeners that are in the USA, a bank holiday is a public holiday.
A national public holiday, so we can all sit around and dress up and watch Star Wars and talk about Star Wars, and why not indeed? There's worse things to do with your time.
Terry, it's been a pleasure as always. I enjoy your candour, I enjoy your directness. So it's a big thanks from me. Thanks for spending the time and coming on the show today.
Yeah, always good to listen to somebody that's really experienced. And I think I've learned a lot out of that. Hopefully our listeners have got a lot out of that as well. So Terry, thanks for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, guys. I enjoyed it.
CX Insider, your inside track.
Well, Terry, that was a no-holds-barred kind of session, wasn't it? No punches pulled. What was your favourite bit, Angus?
I think what really surprised me when we went into this discussion, I thought this was all going to be from a seller's point of view. And he certainly articulated that. But listening to it, there were real nuggets and gems for buyers. If you go through that whole thing, I think what he was talking about is as valuable for sellers as it was for buyers.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it reinforced a lot of what we said in those 3 RFP episodes. He obviously knows what he's talking about. And I like the structure as well. Terry seems to enjoy a bit of structure to the point of being kinky about it, I think. But anyway, I like those 4 categories that he used. The fair and open, the unfair and not so open, the fantasy shopper, which was hilarious, and the free consultancy thing. We've all been there, right? We've all experienced those things in different ways. And
I think he was saying what a lot of people think.
Yeah.
But he put them into really easy to understand categories. I think his 1 in 3 ratio was really interesting.
Absolutely. Those numbers, he expects to win 1 in 3 of the bid-worthy opportunities that he's got. Never mind about all the others that he rejects. And talking of rejection, bear in mind, people, that the average success rate for a cold tender response, i.e. one that you're not properly engaged with, is 7 or 8%. And each one of those can cost you about 30k to respond to. That is a going out of business strategy if you don't get it right.
Yeah, I think any sales managers listening to this need to pay attention to this, because I actually think that 1 in 3 is not just about public sector. I think this applies to all RFPs.
If you're in enterprise sales, there are slightly different ways of articulating the solutions and the proposition, but the basic metrics still apply. There's a win ratio and there's a cost to bidding.
I thought the one thing that really applies to public sector, which I don't think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Terry will correct me, that public sector RFPs are very biased towards cost over quality, and that you carry that penalty if you don't hit that cost gate. I thought that was really interesting. That was an insight I certainly didn't have. And he reinforced the fact that RFPs often are just poorly articulated. They have got unrealistic requirements. Typical of stuff we've been speaking about previously.
Yeah. It comes across quite strongly that he feels he wants to do good with these public sector procurement opportunities that he's got. He wants to make sure that the public purse is being spent effectively and people are getting good value. And I thought it was very interesting to hear about his views of social value, and also the way that certain buyers view it. I mean, it sounds like a bit of a racket, doesn't it? Sometimes, if you're not, he didn't use those words. I just did, in my opinion. It sounds a bit dodgy sometimes. People asking for handouts in the name of social value. That's not right. But anyway, I'm sure it's not everybody, but it's there.
We all know it's there. We've all seen it before. But I thought social value was just an interesting concept. I've never heard it articulated like that.
No, it's good. And then finally, his final wish was May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. May the 4th be a national holiday for Star Wars fans. How sad is that?
Not something I can relate to, but, good luck, Terry.
Anyway, we're going to be back next time with episode 22.
In the meantime, follow the Angus and Pete Show on LinkedIn for news and notifications. Message us directly to tell us what you want us to talk about, how we're doing, and please keep that post bag bulging.
The show's available on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so listen, like, subscribe, and share to help us spread the word.
Before we go, Pete, it's Joke of the Week time.
It is, and there's something a bit different this week. One of Terry's conditions, his non-negotiables, was that he wanted to do the Joke of the Week. So we're going to hand back to Terry now to hear how funny he really is.
So the Joke of the Week. Why do scuba divers roll off the back of the boat?
Don't know.
No idea.
If they roll forward, they're still in the boat.
You've been taking joke lessons from Pete.
I've been struggling with that joke all week since I heard it. Keeps popping into my head.
Well, he's a jolly chap, isn't he? He's got to be one of the jolliest public sector salespeople I've ever met, because most of them are miserable buggers.
I tell you, it was the ending of the joke that was the best as well. I think that was classic.
It was great. And obviously not as good as my material, but it was up there. It was good enough.
He's a good understudy.
He's very good. Anyway, on that note, cheers, Angus.
Cheers, Pete.
Thanks for tuning in to the Angus and Pete Show. Remember, it's based on the personal views and opinions of the hosts and their guests. If you're feeling aggrieved or litigious, take a chill pill. There's already enough stress in the world. Don't forget to follow our page on LinkedIn and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform for more episodes. We'll see you next time. Oh, and tell your friends.